Okay, we're going to be talking about emotional intimacy today on the podcast. And while we're doing that, I thought we would just stare lovingly in each other's eyes for 30 minutes and then call it a day.
Oh, let's get into that.
Before we get into today's episode, just wanted to remind you that in the description of the video below, we put links to all of our social media accounts.
You can always reach us with questions or comments about this episode at marriagebydesignpodcast@gmail.com.
And finally, if you want to support us financially, there is a link to be able to do so at the end of each of the descriptions of our videos. Now, let's get back to the show. Hey everybody, I'm Nate Warnock.
I'm Andrea Warnock, and you've joined us for Marriage Monday on the Marriage by Design podcast. And this is a time where we get to talk to you about God's design for marriage, what the Bible has to say about that, and how we live that out practically.
That's right. So we have started a series last week talking about what we're calling the intimacy table. And if you're going, I have no idea what you're talking about, invite you to check out our episode just 1 week ago called The Intimacy Table. And essentially what the intimacy table is this word picture of like a dining room table with legs on all four sides.
Could it be a kitchen table instead?
No, it actually has to be a dining room
got
table. And what we were saying was that intimacy really has four pieces to it. There's an emotional piece, a physical, non-sexual physical piece, a spiritual piece, and a sexual piece. And in order for us to build marriages that can hold the weight of the grind of the world around us, we need those four pillars, if you will, those four table legs of intimacy. And so we're going to start talking about those four different pillars over the next 4 weeks. And today we're going to start by talking about emotional intimacy. So the way that we're going to kind of tackle this episode today is thought we'd chat for a minute about what are we talking about when we talk about emotional intimacy? Because sometimes intimacy in general can be one of those words where we just sort of
throw it around.
Oh no, words are coming out of our mouth and we don't actually define what they mean. And then talk a little bit about what we ought to be doing in order to achieve deeper emotional intimacy in our relationship. And you and I came up with three things. Certainly this is not exhaustive, but three things where if you're going, hey, we're struggling in our marriage right now in this area of emotional intimacy, I want you to keep these three things in mind as you begin to really dig into this as a couple. And then after that, we'll talk about just some practical things to be thinking about with regards to emotional intimacy. So as we dig into this, babe, when we talk about emotional intimacy on this channel, what are we talking about?
Well, I've heard people say emotional intimacy is like a way to think about it is into me, see, right? Like I'm allowing you to see into me. So I think that's stop giving me that
I'm just
look.
saying we're not talking about sexual intimacy for a couple
Stop.
more weeks.
I'm allowing you to see who I really am and to know who I really am, right? But I think it's more than just that. It's also caring about the other seeing into the other person. So it's giving full access to your spouse to know who you are and to see that and experience that, but also caring for and loving your spouse and who they are and wanting to know that and continuing to try to understand your spouse and know them at a deeper level always, even if you've been married 70 years,
Right.
So
in a sense, this is sort of the feels of marriage, right? Like this is the feely one,
a little
right?
bit.
I mean, we definitely get, would you say, of the 150 or 200 couples that we've had the opportunity to mentor over the last decade, a lot of couples that they're all in the feels of marriage, right? I mean, they're and obviously not all good feels, but that's still, I mean, I would imagine there are people watching this who maybe's marriage is in a good place where they'd go, hey, we had some emotionally intimate times when we lost a child,
Yeah.
or when we lost a parent, or my husband or wife lost a job. So it's not, emotional intimacy isn't just the good feels. But when
And
we
it also
talk
isn't
about,
just the bad feels.
right, but when we talk about emotional intimacy, it's emotion. That's a big part of it. But as we think about this, I loved what you said about, it's letting the other person see who you really are. And in some ways, we don't have a table leg that's mental intimacy, because I think we kind of would say that, hey, having intellectual conversation is part of how you build emotional intimacy.
Totally.
Because you're, combining who you are at an emotional mind level with your spouse.
I would say the intellectual conversation is part of what we'll talk about later, just a practical way to cultivate intimacy in having dialogue, rather than just communicating. But so we can get into that later.
Right. So as we jump into kind of transition from definitional to, okay, what are we doing here? I do want to say, and I'm going to try and say this in every video, babe, so help me remember. It's really hard to just put these in one bucket, right? It's really hard to talk about emotional intimacy in a vacuum.
Yeah.
And really, that's why we talk about it as an intimacy table, because
they all support each other.
Yeah, as you start to get your table legs out of whack, it doesn't matter how strong you think your spiritual intimacy is. If emotional and physical are lacking, the table's out of whack. And it's actually, if you have a table where one leg is long and the other three are short, and you start putting pressure on the tabletop, that strong leg's going to snap.
Well, yeah, and we've found that in our own marriage. Like we can struggle more with the emotional intimacy side of our marriage. And it's just not something that comes natural mostly for me, but it's something that we're always having to really press into and choose for our marriage. And we find that when we're lacking in emotional intimacy, or any of the areas of intimacy, that all the other areas in which we are usually strong in are lacking too. Yeah. They're strained. Yeah, they just don't. Our marriage doesn't jive like it should. It's more of a grind. But when we're choosing the emotional intimacy and the physical and the sexual and the spiritual, when we're choosing to really go run the race well in all of those areas,
right,
they just kind of all feed off of each other. Right. And then it becomes this marriage just really is firing on all cylinders. Like it feels life-giving and not like I'm giving my life into it. Right. Some days are like that, right? Sure. And we have found that when we're making the choices to cultivate intimacy in every single area, that they just feed off each other, Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's good. That's exactly right. And so if you're watching this and you're going, man, emotional intimacy we could be better in, but if she would just give me more sex, or if he would just rub my back more, then I would be more emotionally intimate. That's kind of something that we really want to call out in every video. That's not how this works. As we pursue intimacy, you've got to pursue the intimacy with no expectation of, some other,
whatever, some other level
manipulating
of
some form of other behavior out of your spouse. So talking about emotional intimacy, what are the things that we need to be focused on in order to have deeper emotional intimacy in our marriages? And I think we kind of said, for Andrea and I, there are really three things in our experience, having dealt with all the couples that we've dealt with, that we really need to be focused on in achieving deeper intimacy in marriage. And the first one is humility. So much of being emotionally vulnerable, it's really easy to allow that to devolve into using your spouse's vulnerabilities to your advantage. And nothing will destroy emotional intimacy faster than using those emotionally intimate times, the intimate things that you know about your spouse that maybe nobody else knows or very few other people know, and you using that privilege to either cut them down when you're angry or puff yourself up in some sort of circumstance. And so it takes a ton of humility to really be a secret keeper for your spouse. And obviously I don't mean that in like a sort of bad way at all. I mean that as a, when our spouse opens up to us about those things that are intimate to them, and I mean, it could be something as simple as how they feel about their job, right? Like not the technical, physical, I went to work, I had a nice day, but how they really feel about what's going on. Those kinds of things are intimate details, and how we hold those on behalf of our spouse is sort of like them giving you a loan of who they are, and how you hold that loan, the confidence you hold it in, determines the intimacy level in your marriage. So that's the first part of humility. The second part of humility is understanding that when we start opening up with each other at deeper levels and emotions get involved, it can be really easy for us to be hurt emotionally, and your spouse may not even know it. And so the other part of humility is not jumping on every opportunity to go, you hurt me, that hurt me.
Yeah.
Or, allow these emotional conversations to turn into arguments. Because I know a lot of couples that thought they were doing well in this area got off track because their emotionally intimate moments became just one fight after another. And of course, it doesn't take very long before you go, well, then I'm just not going to open up to you emotionally anymore, because it always leads to a fight.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Being humble and being able to hear some things that maybe are hard to hear, but are good to get out there, and not just being so offendable.
Yeah, and I think maybe another part of humility, and this is one I think probably a lot of guys could be better with, is you hear your spouse open up about something emotionally, and it triggers a thought in your mind, and then you want to talk for 10 minutes about how to fix that thing, or how, well, if I'd have been in that situation, here's what I'd have done, or how about we do this thing, instead of just asking small questions to say, hey, tell me more about that. Or how do you think that impacted you? Or a great question is, if it's about something from previous in their life, how do you think that impacts our relationship? Right? Those are questions inviting your spouse into deeper levels of intimacy with you.
Yeah, I think another part of humility too would be, as you're opening up deeper levels of who you are, there may be some things where your spouse could say, hey, I really think that's something you should probably work through, or that's probably not right. And so, let's get in the Word and see what the Bible has to say about that, or let's get with the Lord and work through that. And it takes a lot of humility to be like, man, that my spouse may be onto something with that, and I'm not going to shove them away,
right?
Because they want the best for me by calling me out.
Yeah.
So that takes some humility too.
Right. So humility is the first one. What do you got?
So the other thing that we would say is being introspective, just knowing, what do I think about things and what do I feel about things. And I didn't realize until I was a decent way into our marriage that I didn't really know how I felt and thought about a lot of things. And it took some time for me to realize that. And then it took time, of course, once I did, for me to start digging into that. What a weird thing that I didn't know how I felt about things. Whatever. I don't know how I got there, but I came to this realization that I I don't know how I feel about things, and I certainly can't talk about that because I don't know.
Right.
And so I think it's really important for us to be introspective and know, like, these things happen in my day. How do I feel about them?
Right.
What do I really think about them? Or this is happening in the world or around me or whatever. What are my thoughts on that? And then sharing that with our spouse. So but yeah, being willing to think about not just, hey, this happened, I'm going to shove it under the rug,
Right.
or I'm just going to move on.
Right.
But having some time to think about how you feel about that, how that's impacted you.
Yep.
Is that something that you need to spend some time on? All that sort of thing. Just being introspective about your own thoughts and feelings.
Totally. And that may mean that you need to use some communication to talk about that, because some people, not necessarily anyone sitting in this room right now with you and I, might be that way and might be married to someone who is very much not that way and really can invite some issues in marriage, because you're maybe some conversations going on and you're going, man, I don't even really know how I feel about that. And when you don't respond and you don't say, hey, you know what, I don't know how I feel about that, like I need a little bit of time to think about that, to the other person, it just feels like you're shoving it under the rug, even though you're not. That's not what you're doing. You just genuinely don't know. And so it really takes even introspection to be able to go, man, I need to be more introspective about that, and then communicate that to your spouse. It goes a long way in communicating to your spouse, hey, I want to be emotionally vulnerable with you, but I have a hard time being emotionally vulnerable with me.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to be emotionally vulnerable with you until I've had a chance to process. And then really being a leader, if that's you, in going, okay, I don't actually know, it's Sunday. Let's talk about this on Wednesday, and that'll give me some time to kind of think about it.
Yep. Yeah, that's
good.
Great.
Really, really good, babe.
What's the third thing that you feel
so
like?
We've got humility, introspection, and the last one is transparency. It doesn't do you any good to be humble and to know every little intricate detail about yourself because you've been introspective if you're not willing to be transparent. And the hardest part about this is, and this is where we start getting ourselves into the marriage death spiral, which is, well, I don't really feel comfortable enough emotionally with her, or I don't really feel comfortable enough emotionally with him to be transparent. But it's the transparency that will get you comfortable enough with each other to continue to be transparent. So the really difficult part about this particular one is, the thing about transparency is we have to come to a place where we recognize God is in charge, and we have a responsibility to him to honor our marriage. And part of honoring our marriage is seeking deeper emotional intimacy with my spouse. And how am I going to do that? Well, I have to be able to be transparent with them. And you might be at a place where you're like, well, yeah, but if I'm transparent with my spouse, then they might shove it right back at me. And in which case I'd go, maybe. And I hope they don't. That's wrong if they do. But if they do, then they do. And, your response is your responsibility. And we each, as married couples, have a responsibility before the Lord to seek transparency in our relationship with our spouse. And even though that's difficult, there's a reason for that. Because when we're transparent with our spouse, it takes us to deeper levels of emotional intimacy. And, look, there's no magic word to make this happen. It really is just a matter. That'd be great if there was. Yeah, it would. It's just a matter of creating space in your schedule to be able to have transparent conversation with your spouse, and then choosing to do it. And, if you've listened to our channel, over the last 3 seasons plus, that there are some times where we have told you, hey, you need to be transparent, but you don't necessarily need to be transparent with your spouse about this. And, for example, your spouse probably doesn't, if you're a guy and you struggle at times in the area of lust, your spouse probably doesn't want you being transparent with them about every one of her friends that you think is hot. Probably there's that needs to be, I'm not telling you to not be transparent. I'm telling you maybe she's not the one you need to be being transparent with. You need to have some sort of mentor in your life that you can have that conversation with to root out the heart issue and the temptation that's inherent in that. But I'm talking about being transparent about who you are at a core level. We spend so much time putting on masks, metaphorically speaking, in our lives, that a lot of us have lost touch with what it means to truly be transparent.
Yeah.
That's really sad. And we need to work hard in our marriages to strip those masks away. And your spouse can't rip them away from you. So if you're listening to this and you're going, heck yeah, Nathan, my spouse needs to hear this, you need to worry about your masks. You don't need to worry about your husband or wife's masks, because you can't rip them off them. They have to choose to put them down.
Mm-hmm. It's great.
All right. Humility, introspection, transparency. Those are kind of our three cores for, hey, you want to get jump started in intimacy in your marriage right now. Those are the three things that we would encourage you to focus on right now. So practically, in this last few minutes we have together, babe, practically, what would you say? How do we go about having deeper levels of intimacy in our marriage?
Right. So one of the things that we talk about is when we're talking to our spouse and wanting that emotional intimacy, changing from communication to dialogue.
Yep.
So there's a difference there. Communication is really just relaying facts. So easy, high level stuff is like the weather, generally how our day went.
Yep.
This child was a pain. This child was amazing. Whatever. All the facts, right?
And it really is a one-way street.
Yes.
Right. So think of communication like when we were all in high school and some overly joyful individual would jump on the PA system at dark 30 in the morning and wah for
that
3 or 4 or 5. That does
not sound like an overly joyful person.
3 or 4 or 5, that's what it sounded like to me. 3 or 4 or 5 minutes about whatever's going on in the school.
Yep.
Right. That's communication. They didn't care what you thought of it. There was no opportunity for response. Here's the information. Now go.
Right. So yeah, you're right. Communication is mostly a one-way street. Dialogue is a two-way street.
Right.
We're talking about something and then the other person's talking back, giving a response to that and saying how they feel or whatever. So dialogue is a two-way street, but it's getting into the deeper levels of communication. It's getting into the levels of how I think and how I feel about something. Not just communicating facts, saying facts, or even dialoguing about facts, but it's, hey, let's talk about then what I think about that, how I feel about that, how does that impact me?
Right.
All that kind of thing. That's really more dialogue. And then the other person is responding, not just listening and saying, okay, but really trying to dig that, kind of like till the soil of that a little bit more, and find out more about that. And we talk about cultivating intimacy, and really cultivating it is a process, and it's an intentional, tilling up the soil and planting seeds and watering those seeds. It takes time to see that intimacy grow. And so, yeah, dialoguing back and forth and really trying to find out more and more and more about what the person is choosing to talk about is important.
Right. So if communication's like the PA announcer, then dialogue, I always like to talk about like playing catch, or either baseball catch or football catch, right? And you don't it's not just throwing the ball at each other, right? When you're playing catch, you make sure the other person's looking at you and you're making eye contact with them and you're trying to put them in a position to catch the ball, right? I mean, that's how dialogue is. In fact, if you really struggle with dialogue, using a ball is a really good way to go about that. If you don't have the ball, you shouldn't be talking.
My mom taught us kids typically are good one-way talkers.
Right. Communicators.
Yeah.
But not good dialoguers.
And they don't naturally dialogue. If that's taught, something that's taught, be interested in the other person kind of thing. And that's the way my mom taught us to learn how to talk to other people, particularly adults and all that sort of thing, is, hey, you have the ball, you're saying something, but then you're giving the ball to them, giving them an opportunity to say something, asking them about their lives, whatever, and that person then gives a response, and they should be kind of asking your opinion or about your life or your experience.
Right.
And
Right.
so it is a really great visual of like, okay, I have the ball, but I should also be interested in passing that ball back and forth.
Right. So you want deeper levels of emotional intimacy. Learn how to dialogue at deeper levels. That's great. Here's another one. Now, you thought your point was good, babe. This is really deep. Ask them. So often we make these intimacy things, and this is going to be probably a practical in every single intimacy episode we do. Have the courage to just simply ask.
Mm-hmm.
Babe, what can we do to have deeper emotional intimacy in our relationship? And then listen to what
care
they
about
say.
what they say. Right.
Right.
And implement.
Right. And if you're being asked this question, this is not a good time for you to hammer them with some annoyance you've had with them that, now you've got the floor, so you're really going to get them. Because if you do that, don't be surprised if that's the last time that person asks what we can do to grow in emotional intimacy. That's an opportunity to really be introspective. And if you struggle with that, this is a good opportunity to go, I don't know, I need to think about that, and then come back at a later time. But ask the question, and not just one time. Ask it, every monthly. Hey, what can we do to have deeper levels of emotional intimacy in our relationship? And also, as that becomes a habit, it will become a habit to be introspective about that individually and think, man, I know he's going to ask, or I know she's going to ask. Mm-hmm. How can I answer this in a way that would be, truthful?
That's good. Another thing is to be present when you're together.
Yeah, that's good.
So, we can fall into these really bad habits of being too interested in our technology, whether that's what's on the TV or what's in the palm of your hand.
Right.
And, just making sure
that's a big one.
Making sure that we're present when we're together. And I can really struggle with that. And we are trying really hard to really kind of go over the top on that, and not just when we're together, like the two of us at the end of the day when the kids are in bed or whatever, but really just being present when we're around people.
Right.
So not allowing technology to infiltrate our lives, and being really purposeful with how that's being used in our home and in our relationships.
Right. That's good. That's good. And then the last one, babe, you did some online research. What did you find out?
Yeah, so I looked online just to find out what people are saying of ways to grow emotional intimacy. And some of the things were like stare at each other into each other's eyes for, I don't remember how long they said, like 4 minutes or something like that. And then another one was hug each other for 4 minutes. I'm probably wrong on the timing, but making a choice to stare in each other's eyes, making a choice to really embrace for a long, probably uncomfortable amount of time.
Uncomfortable for you.
But it's one of those things where it's like uncomfortable until it's not. You kind of crest that.
No, that's fair.
That, oh, this feels so weird. And then you kind of just get into it and feel comfortable about it.
I think we ought to do it every day.
Okay. So oddly, so those sound like really cheesy. Stare at each other and give each other this long embrace.
And something about compliments too, right?
Oh yeah, and give each other 5 compliments. Genuine, real. These are the things that I really like or love about you. And several couples did them, and when they were done, they were like, I do really feel a lot closer to you. And one of the couples, I can't remember if I was watching a video or reading an article, but one of the couples was like really in a rough spot. And at the end of that, I mean, such a simple thing, but at the end of that, they were like, I feel so much better about us. So
That's great.
Just simple and worth trying.
That's great. Well, guys, thanks so much for joining us. I hope that there was something that you could take away from this video, whether you're in a great place in emotional intimacy with your spouse or you're struggling. I hope there was something that you thought, man, we could be better, or I could be more introspective, more humble, more transparent.
Yeah, or let us know ways that you are
totally
that you find to be emotionally intimate in your relationship.
That'd totally. Leave those in the comment below. Pop over to our Facebook page, Marriage by Design Podcast, and leave those comments there as well. Or you can go to marriagebydesign.podbean.com. There's a dedicated page for this episode there as well. Guys, otherwise, we will be back at you in just 1 week from today. So grateful for you joining us. Love to have you share this with someone that you think it would impact. But until next week, have a great week. And remember, God is for your marriage.